Hey guys, thanks for checking out Quick Sessions Podcast. My name is Garrett Terrio, and today we're covering something that we've definitely talked about in previous podcasts about how to build muscle. But today we're going to talk specifically about muscle hypertrophy. And what that is, the enlargement of your muscle fibers. Now, be very clear, this is not the addition of extra muscle fibers. That is something that theoretically could happen, but has not been proven to be something that the human body does. In rats and things like that, they've kind of been able to create that, the addition of muscle fibers. But as far as humans are concerned, we're born with the muscle fibers we're always going to have. We're not going to create new muscle fibers. We can only increase the size of the ones we already have. And the way to do that is muscle hypertrophy. That's the process. Because what it is the muscle, it's a postmitotic tissue, meaning that it doesn't undergo cell replacement throughout your life, like our skin cells and all that. So it needs a efficient method for cellular repair in order to avoid, the loss of our mass, our skeletal mass. And in comes muscle hypertrophy. And it occurs when protein synthesis exceeds the protein breakdown. And we've gone over that in the past also, that you will start to atrophy, you'll start to lose muscle if it's flipped, right? If the protein breakdown is greater than muscle synthesis. So whenever protein synthesis is exceeding the breakdown, that is muscle hypertrophy. That's it. That's the definition. And the way it works is when you go and work out, when your muscles are aroused, these satellite cells come in and ultimately fuse to your existing cells in your muscles. What they do is create these things called myofibers, and these new myofibers help to repair and grow the new muscle tissue from after it gets broken down. And the biggest reason these satellite cells initiate muscle hypertrophy is because they essentially donate an extra nuclei to your muscle fibers, which help it increase its capacity to synthesize new proteins. And that is just the big old cycle it goes through, and that is ultimately how your muscles get bigger. Now, on top of that, when you're lifting and all that, you also have an elevated level of anabolic hormones. And this increase in these hormones increase the likelihood of your receptors to take in all those satellite cells and synthesize all that protein and ultimately help you to get bigger muscles. Now, there's three main hormones in your body, and you've probably heard of most of these. It's the insulin-like growth factor, IGF-1. You have testosterone, and you have growth hormone. And the job of each of them, for the IGF-1, the insulin-like growth factor, it acts like insulin, and it recruits more of these satellite cells, right? So the more cells you have coming in, the greater opportunity you have to increase the absorption of the protein and create protein synthesis. Now, the second one, the testosterone, it's a cholesterol-derived hormone, and it has a big-time anabolic effect on the muscle tissue. And what it does is it can manipulate the neurotransmitters in your muscle and increase the cell size through this neurotransmission. So with this increased hormone, with testosterone, this promoted anabolic state that it puts you in, you increase your protein synthesis rate, and it inhibits your protein breakdown. So that's the prime cocktail for increasing muscle size, right? That's just what we talked about. When protein synthesis is above protein breakdown, that is when muscle hypertrophy happens. And the last one is the growth hormone. It is secreted by the anterior pituitary gland. And what this GH does, this growth hormone, is it initiates the uptick in your muscles for absorbing the amino acids and the proteins and all that. So those are your three main hormonal aspects to it. Now, as far as the training side goes, how exactly does it work, muscle hypertrophy? How do you actually achieve this mass gaining state? Well, there's two schools of thought, right? So bodybuilders, for instance, let's use them as an example of some of the biggest people we know. These bodybuilders normally train they don't go super heavy. They have moderate loads, but what they do is they take pretty short rests, right? Whereas on the other side, you have the power lifters, the other huge people we know, and their deal is to lift a ton of weight, put a lot of stress on their muscles, and take very long breaks. They're both huge, so they're both kind of right? But how can one function of the body be the same with two different approaches? That's kind of the question. Now, let me be clear before I go any further on. If you're not a trained person, if you're just starting the gym, muscle hypertrophy is almost non-existent during your first few weeks of workout. So within a couple months of training, that's when hypertrophy kind of begins for you. Before that, everything is just neurological adaptation. It's your body figuring out the balance and the weight and the form and all that. Now, as you become more trained, obviously it gets harder to gain mass, right? They call plateaus, stops in the road, whatever your term is for that. So you kind of go through this cycle when you start working out of no muscle being added for a few months. You're getting stronger, but it's all neurological. It's all balance. Then you start putting on some mass, and then boom, you hit a plateau. And then after that, your training regimen kind of dictates how you get past that plateau. You got to just figure it out, right? Now, what happens to grow muscle? Well, ultimately, your muscles are just trying to adapt to the loads you're lifting. The heavier you get, the more your muscles need to adapt. And the way they do that is there's an increase in these things called sarcomeres, and they're in every muscle. And your muscles are always trying to adapt to this new uptick in sarcomeres, the length and all that. And essentially, length is the key word here because everything, push or pull, everything's a pull on your muscles. No matter what exercise you're doing, we break it down into push and pull. But muscles, when they stretch and then they contract, that's just how muscles work. So length is really the key. They have to adapt to a new length. And that's why muscle hypertrophy is so prominent whenever you have a lot of good eccentric contractions going on in your routine, right? Because on the way down, on the part that doesn't seem as heavy, you're bracing yourself for the load. And when you're doing that, you're gathering a bunch of more sarcomeres into this muscle. You may call them negative reps. Some people do isometric reps. All that stuff's great. In that eccentric phase is while you'll feel a little more sore sometimes because there's more muscle breakdown from all that adaptation. Your muscle's trying to lengthen to get used to this heavy load that you're guiding down. So for the initiation of this hypertrophy, you have three main ingredients, right? You have your tension, muscular tension, mechanical tension, if you will. You have the damage done to your muscle, and then you have the metabolic stress going on to your muscles. Now, the mechanical tension, that's the obvious one, right? It's the force and the stretch generated by your muscles while you're working out. The damage is the tearing apart of your muscles, the breakdowns that the protein is going in there to fix. And then the stress is the more anabolic role that your muscles are going through. That is when your muscles are feeling the effect of all the lactic acid that's built up, the stress, the burn, you want to call it, that's the metabolic stress. And all these things really work together to put your muscles in a position where they can actually hypertrophy. Now, how do you do it? So, do you do like a bodybuilder or a power lifter? We're still not there yet. I know I'm kind of going roundabout way to this answer, but I just want to kind of give you guys everything there is to it before I just say, oh, here's how you do it. So you got your stresses, right? You got your metabolic stress, you got your muscle damage, and you have your mechanical tension. So you have all that. How do you achieve all that? How do you make sure you have enough tension and damage done to the muscle and enough stress on your muscles? Well, here's all it is. And it's simple. And if you've ever trained with me, you've heard me say all these words 100 times. Intensity. Greater intensity is always better. Pretty simple. I'd love to find someone who disagrees with me on that. Volume. The amount of reps you do. If you just come in every day, do 3 sets of 10 on chest, it's not going to get it done. You don't have to do the same exercise multiple sets, but you have to hit that body part multiple times because our bodies, even though we feel like we're wiping them out, they're incredibly good at enduring long bouts of punishment. In fact, that's exactly what the human body is made for. It's made to endure punishment. And that sounds extreme, but there's not another, I guess I could say stress. It's meant to handle stress. It grows from stress. If you don't stress it, it shrinks. Your muscular frame, that is. And then the third thing that I kind of just alluded to with volume is your exercise selection. Obviously, your compound lifts are going to be more effective in inducing hypertrophy. So you always want to start with your biggest lift, use the most energy, recruit the most fibers before you go to your isolation stuff. Also, your compound lifts, you're always going to be able to be more intense with those. It's kind of hard to get up and be intense for isolated exercises like curls, tricep push downs, things like that. It's a little hard to get jacked up for that, you know what I mean? And then the last thing is the rest intervals. Now here's the biggest difference. It's the catch-22 of lifting, right? You can do short rest, which brings on a lot of metabolic stress, right? You're more likely to reach that anabolic threshold if you take less rest. You'll get less reps of the same weight, and you'll be burning, you'll feel the lactic acid build up, and that's great, right? That sounds perfect. On the other hand, you have long rest intervals, where you'll fully recover, but you can also do more weight. You'll be able to crank out more reps at a higher rate. So that sounds great, right? You lift the most weight the most times. Well, like everything else, it's kind of right in the middle, right? Moderate rest intervals appear to provide the best compromise between long and short rest periods. So we're talking 60 to 90 seconds, but real recovery happens really right between the 50, 60 second mark of a lift. That's when your ATP's been able to regenerate. It's when you finally caught your breath and you can gear up and go at it again. Another thing that helps, and it's not necessarily a rule when you go out to lift, but going to failure. I like to have everyone I work out with, especially if we're going heavy, bench, squat, deadlift, whatever, any of the big lifts, I like to get at least 1 or 2 sets to failure. And the reason being, I want these guys' bodies, guys or girls, their bodies to get to a point where their muscles have given everything and they just cannot support the weight that they're doing anymore. It gives you an idea of where you're at, and it gives your muscles an idea where they're at. And now it knows you got to recruit more muscle to do this, which will come with working out, getting stronger, but at least putting your body through that stress wakes it up and gives it an idea, okay, this is the next spot. If I can only do 8 reps, I got to adapt and be able to do 9 reps. And you adapt through constantly working out, increasing the volume, intensity if it's not already increased, all the normal things you go and you do at the gym. Now, we talked a little bit about eccentric contractions and how good they are as far as muscle hypertrophy, growing the size of the fibers in your muscle. And I'm just going to stress this again, that the lengthening of your muscles on the way down, if you're a bench press, when you're lowering the bar, you are stretching that muscle. And when that muscle stretches, there is more of a capability to absorb this protein. There's a rise in protein synthesis, and you have a greater increase in that insulin because of that. So that brings me to the last thing, which is the speed that you lift. I've always been a pretty fast bench presser, but the truth is, if I wanted to get a larger chest, you would want to slow down just a little bit on the way down. Ideally, you want to go down 2 to 4 seconds, and you can go up as fast as you want. That's the concentric contraction. But on the way down, I always say 3 seconds. You can go 4, you can go 5. I did curls today, and I did an 8 second, and maybe a little bit of overkill, but I took my time and took 8 seconds for the eccentric part of that workout. But in a nutshell, going slower on the way down will help lengthen those muscles, increase its opportunity for protein synthesis, and ultimately lead to muscle hypertrophy. So that brings us all the way around. What is the best way to work out to get your muscles bigger? Well, it's not low rep, it's not high rep. It's between 6 and 12 reps per set with rest intervals of 60 to 90 seconds, right? So it's all a compromise, like most stuff in life. Right in the middle is your ideal spot for a muscle hypertrophy-based program. And within that, what I like to do, like I told you earlier, is I like to have a couple sets to failure at the very end, because that means your muscles are working to the brink as far as weight and reps are concerned. And during a hypertrophy program, I like to even go above 20 sometimes, whether it's warm-up sets, burnout sets at the very end, what have you. So keeping it on the higher range is the key to getting bigger muscles. And like I said earlier, people think these bodybuilders are just lifting a ton of weight, and they do lift a ton of weight, don't get me wrong. But it's not like power lifters where they're going on the bench press for an hour doing sets of 2 and 3, right? These guys are doing 6 to 12 to 20 to even 30 reps sometimes, all to push their anabolic threshold, increase the GH, the testosterone, the IGF-1, and increase that protein synthesis. Because that is the name of the game when it comes to getting your muscles bigger. That's why we drink protein right after our workouts. And ultimately, things like volume, intensity, rest periods is all going to be huge factors. The number one mistake I see with guys trying to get big is they take too long to rest. And it should be obvious, right? When you don't have a lot of rest period, all of a sudden, the veins start popping a little bit more, getting a little sweatier, and all that should be common sense when it comes to working out. The more exhausted you are in the shorter period of time, the better workout you're getting. If you are a power lifter, ignore me saying that. You are trying to do something different. You're trying to get strong. Getting big is not your mission. Your mission is to be the strongest pound for pound that you can be. So that's about it, guys. If you're interested in muscles getting bigger, this was the podcast for you. If you enjoyed it, please give us a nice 5-star review in the Apple Pod Center. You can also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. That's Quick Sessions Podcast. I'm Garrett Terrio coming to you from Houston, Texas, and Timberline Fitness. Catch y'all next time.